Okie dokie. Where we last left off is we were talking about how the Securities and Exchange Commission keeps our markets, our stock markets, robust, sound, and fair, and makes the United States one of the great countries for trading publicly held company securities, or stock, if you will. And underneath this backdrop, the Department of Justice administers or enforces the criminal statute, hence they prosecute criminally wrongdoers of the Fcpa. That's the whole idea, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And the Securities and Exchange Commission comes along, and in doing their job of policing the marketplace, should they encounter somebody who hurts the marketplace by violating the law, and it certainly can damage the marketplace if this kind of activity is carried out by companies that are traded on the U.S. markets, so they can ask for damages to the marketplace by the actions of parties guilty of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And so that's how this breaks down. So this is a civil suit, there's a criminal suit, and they both get they usually get their hands in the pie. If there's a good case, they're both there at the same time usually. All right, moving along. Few cases are actually reported in court cases. This is what this is referring to. And the reason for it is because the law allows for a great deal of penalty, which we will go into in a little bit further. And as we demonstrated in the last video, the penalties can be very steep. So since the law itself has a great deal of potential penalty, when the Department of Justice does make an accusation and file charges against a company, it's usually not without merit, okay? Usually they've done their predication and they've got a good theory of fraud and a smoking gun. So typically the companies that have been charged with violating the FCPA are more interested in making a settlement rather than running the risk of going to court and having the full extent of the law's penalty applied to them. They are many times off better just saying, okay, let's find a way to fix this, a compromise between what penalty they'd like to pay versus what penalty it could be if they went to court and really lost big time. So because of that, we don't have too many cases in court interpreting the law, which would help us have a better idea of what the language of the law means, but we just have to go with what we've got. And therefore, we will learn the elements of the law in a second, and always being able to define what they mean is difficult because there are, as we say, few reported cases which would provide what we call precedent. We haven't gone over too much over the basics of law in this class. We are doing it, I guess, piecemeal, so to speak. But the idea is that case law, or cases that go to court, hence the name case law, in the court system, in the United States, what happens is that the courts help interpret what the language of the law means to see whether it applies in any particular case. And those case law, those decisions, set precedent as to how the law should be interpreted and enforced. And so since we don't have much with this particular law, it's almost whatever the Department of Justice says it should be, and we've got settlements happening all the time. The court cases are publicly reported. They are published, so we can read anybody can read them. Some of them are fun to read, and we can then find out what this precedent is all about by looking at the cases and how they've been decided based on facts and circumstances in each case. When you do not have lots of case law, the result is that you can't look at what has been settled. Settlements are not publicly made available. They are all done privately. And so you can't say to the Department of Justice, well, with such and such a company, XYZ company, you settled for $1 million and our facts are the same, so why are you charging us $10 million? You can't do that because you don't even know if that's the case. Even if the lawyer you used was in the other case, they can't tell you about it. It's privileged information. And so this all remains quite private. And so there's really little or no precedent as to how the law should be adjudicated. Nevertheless, this is what we got. All right, so let's go into the elements of the law. It's an anti-bribery law, hence the name Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, referring specifically to bribes. It applies only to the bribe payer. This is kind of interesting. When we did bribery and extortion and corruption and gratuity, we looked at it and we said either party or both parties can be charged. They're both guilty. The one who offers the bribe, the one who accepts the bribe, they're both guilty. Here, we're only talking about the bribe payer, and it makes sense when you think about what the extent of the law is. Let's just take a broad stroke look at it. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act applies to bribes to public officials. We'll get into this in more detail soon, but foreign, so FX meaning foreign, public officials. The United States is looking to prosecute, I think I spelled that wrong, there we go, foreign. The United States is going to prosecute companies that violate this law when it's paid to a foreign public official. The foreign public official, government official, if you will, foreign government official, is definitely not under our jurisdiction. And so we can't prosecute the receiver of the bribe because they don't live here. They're living under the laws of a different country. So our law only applies to the bribe payer. Hence this slide. All right, so that's very interesting law. Here are the elements, and this will help, by going through the elements, it'll help us understand more fully the law that we've scratched the surface on thus far. So the first thing is the violator of the law, or the defendant, was an issuer. So what the heck is an issuer? An issuer is what we call somebody who issues public, and you probably know where we're going, publicly held stock. They issue publicly held stock, and hence the word, we call them an issue. An issuer, that's what we call them. And this means public companies. Public companies are companies that sell their stock on the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, the S&P 500, etc. So they will list their stock on those exchanges. They are the public exchanges, and they're public companies. That's whom the law applies to. Okay, step number one. Step number two, and there's some details in here. So this is, if we call this step number two, there's some subsets to it. So let's see what they are. Subset number one is the defendant paid or even just offered to pay or authorized another person to pay. And let's stop there and look at this subset. So we see that the defendant paid or offered to pay or authorized. And if this was a live class, I might say, okay, critical thinking, what does this mean? Offered to pay, and you would say, oh, so this is another example of an inchoate crime where you can be found guilty just by the fact that you made the offer. You don't have to actually do it. You can just say to a foreign public official, hey, I'll give you, and you're guilty just by making the statement, if it was with intent, the proper intent, that you meant it, and you don't have to go through and pay it. So you can't use as a defense, I never paid the bribe. That's not going to work. Just the offer itself is a violation of the law. Certainly if you pay it, that works. And this is interesting. Authorize another. Here's where the law says, do not use as your defense that I didn't do it, but an agent did it. So if an agent pays it, you're as guilty as the agent paying it. You don't have to actually do it yourself. You can have someone else do the bribe for you. So this law is rather, we would say this law is broad. It's written broadly, and it can That's why the United States likes it. In addition to the penalty, the fact that it's sort of easy to get people caught up in this law if they're guilty, because it's rather broad. The next subset here, let's look at the next subset. This ought to have seemed familiar. Anything of value, you might remember from the bribery class that this means both property, which cash, tangible assets, things you can touch, move, or even if you can't move it, you can touch it, tangible assets. But also anything of value, which could be simply entertainment, meals. Well, I guess you can say that's tangible, but it can be entertainment, it can be favors, anything of value. And so it's quite, as we said, it's quite broad, covers a lot of ground. All right, so that's a subset number 2. First was the payment or the offer to pay. Subset number 2 is what's being offered is anything of value. Let's do subset number 3. I'm going to erase some of the stuff on here. Let's get some room to get to the next subset of the element of the law, which would be it is direct. The payment is direct or indirectly to a qualifying foreign public official, and indirectly means on the opposite side. When you are giving the bribe, or your agent gives the bribe, or you're offering the bribe, it doesn't have to be to the foreign official. It could be to their agent. Hey, listen here, Joe. Go back to your leader. Go to your leader and tell your leader that we'll make it worth his while if he will do the following for us. So the agent goes back and tells the foreign official, but the agent is not an official. This could be someone who's not an official, but you still will be guilty of the crime because it's being done indirectly, right? Hence the word indirectly, and that's the idea. And the last subset element of this, and now I'm going to do another eraser, make some room here. The last subset of this part of the elements of the crime is that it has to be to a qualifying foreign public official or a political party or candidate. And this gets a little, doesn't get too difficult, but it just means that the offer has to be made or the bribery gets paid to somebody in public office in a foreign country. So this is not for the U.S. We have statutes for bribery in the U.S., which we've already done. This is for outside the U.S. So payments made outside the U.S. to a foreign official, somebody who is in political office of some sort. Let's see. And the payment is done. I'll tell you what, let's hold here. Let's come back here and hold here, and we will pick this up on the next pickup. Is that a word? I guess, for now.